I'm Lisa Leckie from Pro Writing Aid, and my guest today is Christina Stanley from Fictionary. She's also the best-selling author of the Stone Mountain Mystery series and has many years of experience as a professional editor. Most recently, she is the creative force behind the Fictionary story editing software, which, if you haven't tried yet, you must try. It's a total game changer. So welcome, Christina.
Hi, Lisa. It's really great to be here. And I'm just watching the chat go by, and it's so fabulous. Now I'm really nervous too, because there's people from all over the world.
I know.
It's really
I know.
exciting to see just, with everything going on in the world right now, how all of these countries are here to come together just to talk about editing. So it's kind of exciting.
I know, it's cool. And you've got some neighbors there as well. There's a couple of people from Ontario.
Yeah.
Couple people from India. Oh, Graham's from Calgary. I grew up in Calgary. So we've got people from all over the world, which is great. So Christina and I have been doing a lot of workshops and activities and stuff together because Fictionary and Pro Writing Aid work really well together, and it's a really nice way for us to talk to writers about the whole editing process, about what is story editing, what is copy editing, when should you get a professional at, all of this, the editing process. It's sometimes hard to get your head around and hard to figure out how to make it work for you as the writer to end up with the best product. So we recently did a session at the Self-Publishing Conference. If anybody is here that came along to that, we're going to try not to be too repetitive, but we may cover a few of the same things. And a couple of people sent in some questions in advance, so I've got a list of questions here that we can dig into, but please feel free to add any questions that you've got about how to edit, about whatever you want to talk about. You're welcome to ask about Christina's software, Fictionary. Actually, I'm going to drop another link. We're going to do a whole session that's going to be a proper deep dive into Fictionary on, December 10th?
Yes.
So we're going to go really deep. Christina's going to do some live editing for us so we can actually watch it in action and see how the process works. But if you want to ask some questions about that today as well, or about Pro Writing Aid, you're welcome to do that. Oh, and because I'm always trying to get Christina to give all of our users a deal, I talked her into extending a 40% off discount code that she gave everyone that came to the self-publishing conference until Saturday. Oh, I'm going to drop that in the chat as well, just in case anybody has been looking for a reason to try Fictionary. So, Christina, you ready?
I am ready.
Okay.
I'm nervous though, because off the cuff questions always frighten me because, it's just, you can't prep for it. So here we go.
I know. I've seen you do it before. You'll be fine. I mean, the first question that came in was all about process, and it was about should you do your copy editing or your story editing first? And so I just wondered, well, in answering that question, can you talk a little bit about the different kinds of editing and then how they all fit together in one big process?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a big question, and one that I'm actually strongly opinionated on. That it's a really long journey to write your book from that very first word to publishing it. And if you can do things that will save you time in the process, great. And also it make if you do a better job. So the different types of editing, there's story editing, which is what Fictionary Storyteller helps you with. And story editing is looking at your story. It's not looking at the paragraphs, the words, sentence structure, etc. We don't copy edit at this point. What we're looking at is does your story flow from one scene to the next? Does your story arc work? Are your characters doing the most for you? Are you using the settings to your best advantage in the story? And so it's looking at the higher level aspects of your story to get a super strong story. Copy editing is the next phase where what you want to do is be looking at your words and your sentences. And you're all Pro Writing Aid people, so you all know exactly copy editing, where you're looking at, your repeated words, you're looking at grammatical errors, you're looking at wasted words like very that don't do much, and all those kinds of things. So if you do that too early in the process, it's kind of wasted work in the sense that you're going to rewrite and revise as you're doing your story edit. And it's okay to do a little bit. And honestly, I do a little bit as I'm writing because sometimes I don't have the creative energy to write, but I still want to be productive, and copying is kind of fun. So you go, oh, I'm just going to copy edit this. So fine, it's good practice. So if you go from story editing to copy editing, proofreading is next. And this is where I find sometimes it's unclear what that is. But by the time you're proofreading or you're having your manuscript professionally proofread, it means that person is looking for typos and errors. They're not making suggestions on any kind of rewording or better phrasing or structural changes. It's only looking for errors. So a typo, comma in the wrong place, etc. That's it before you go off to publish your book. So there's other kind of little flavors in between of editing, but those are the three biggies. Does that answer that question, Lisa?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think that order makes a lot of sense. I know some people, everybody has a bit of a cycle of writing, then revision, and then writing, and then revision. And some people do that, they write all day and revise the next morning. That's what Jerry Jenkins does. We've had him on here a few times. Other people write a lot more. Some people write their full draft if you're doing NaNoWriMo or something like that, and then go back and start editing. But it's all sort of the same cycle at just different lengths. The thing that somebody was saying to me the other day, though, is that they for people that have a shorter cycle, if they spend a lot of time editing their first chapter without really seeing their full story all the way through to the end, then quite often you end up going back and getting rid of your chapter or making major changes to your chapter or losing a whole character, for example. And so then you've sort of wasted some of your time. So I think it's a weighing up of those two things, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the other critical thing, if you're looking at having a professional editor edit for you, you need to decide, do you need a story edit? Or are you going to do that first? Fine, do that. Don't pay for a copy edit at that point. And certainly don't pay for a story edit and a copy edit to happen simultaneously. The copy edit then is not worth anything to you because your story is going to change. Like Lisa was just saying, you're going to revise it. So you want to be careful. If you do choose to go to professional editors, you're using the right one at the right time.
Yeah, because you don't, I feel like people will keep things in their story because they've paid to have someone do all the copy editing that maybe should be out of their story. So I think with the whole kill your darlings idea, just the more time and energy you spend on things, the harder it is to let them go. So I think it's good to think big picture first and make sure it's all come together before you're, thinking about word choice.
Yeah. So on that, I just want to read one of the questions here from Linda. It says, I've paid to have my manuscript reviewed through my local writing center. I'm revising my draft as per their comments. Do I still need beta readers before hiring an editor? So that's kind of a personal decision, but the value in beta readers, one, usually they're free. So you can get a lot of insight into your story so that when you go to a professional editor, you're getting a higher quality edit because they have to work on the harder aspects. And I can tell you from experience, when I work on a book, if it's in the beginning stages of the story structure, it's much easier for me because you can see issues very clearly and very quickly. If I'm working on a manuscript that the story is much farther along, it's really hard because now I have to look at, okay, this person's got a great story. How do I make it even better and actually help them without influencing their voice, without changing the story that they want to write? And so it's a totally different challenge to an editor, but that person is paying for high-end advice. So if you use a beta reader, my suggestion is you ask them very specific questions to give you feedback and some easy questions. People don't want to, typically when they're your beta reader, to insult you and make you feel bad. So you can ask questions like, please mark every place where you skim. And that tells you they're bored. So that passage is boring. And they don't have to say, wow, this writing is boring. They don't want to tell you that. So they're probably not going to. So you want to ask really specific questions. That's a good one. Tell me if you're confused on the character names. So that the more specific you can be to a beta reader, the more value you're going to get. And then you fix all of that before you go to professional editor.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And as much as you can ask, I think for beta readers, because they're not professionals, often they feel quite uncomfortable giving a lot of advice about things. Well, I guess not all of them. There's a lot of beta readers that have a lot of opinions about things. But I think if you ask for specific feedback, whether they have a lot of opinions or not enough opinions, you're more likely to get useful information.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so David says people often use the term developmental edit. Is that the same as a story edit?
Yes, and the only reason I like story edit is because there's developmental, there's substantive, there's structural, there's line editing. And when I first started writing, I thought, I don't know what any of these things are. And so I had to go and research them, and that just frustrated me. You think, what is this substantive thing? I don't know. And to me, what you want to do at that phase of your writing is you want to tell the best story possible. And so we call it a story edit because we think it's a friendly term and it's meant to be you're working on your story structure.
Yeah, but don't get too caught up in all the different labels because in a lot of cases they aren't that different really. Okay, I'm gonna drop one more thing here. I had meant to do it in the beginning. Oops. So Christina and I and Joellen Nordstrom did a book together that was for the London Book Fair last year called Your Editing Journey, and I'm just dropping a free download link for that as well because that's going to answer a lot of these questions as well. And I think in there, is that where we included the list of questions to ask your beta reader?
Yep, it's in there. So there's a big
Yeah,
list and it's great to use. Yeah.
yeah, that made me think of it. So there's a lot of good stuff in there in terms of helping you figure out who's going to do what and at what point you should be doing things. And if you're going to, and Joellen runs a professional editing company, so she has a lot of really good insight on about what you should ask your potential editor and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's there. So Linda says, how would you integrate the various software to work the editing process that you just outlined?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that one, Lisa, and I love that question. So you're going to write your draft in whatever software you want to write it in. Lots of people use Word, Google Docs, Scrivener. We do have people who write their first draft in Fictionary, but our goal is to help you edit. So that's what I want you there when you have a draft. So after you've written your first draft, you export it from whatever you've been using into a docx file that gets imported into Fictionary. And there you can do all of your story editing. And I should probably mention we have two products. Storyteller is the one I'm talking about today because it's for writers, and Story Coach is for professional editors. But inside of Fictionary, Pro Writing Aid works like a dream. So you can use it as you're editing your draft, or you can finish your draft and then use Pro Writing Aid afterwards. And so once you've done those two, you've done your story edit, your copy edit, and then you can move on to tools like Vellum to format your book, any of the online publishing tools to get your book out there. I mean, there's a lot of software at that point that you can use to create your own book cover or have somebody hire. So it's kind of a big question in that sense, but there is an order into how you use the tools.
Okay, great. Someone says, can Fictionary also be used for nonfiction narrative?
The only nonfiction we have are people who are writing memoirs, and it's a creative memoir. So it's someone who's writing a true story, but it's a story. It's not a factual historical memoir. So that's the only jump we make into nonfiction. But other than that, we are fiction focused.
Yeah, all of the best features in Fictionary are about finding all of your characters in your different scenes and when the most important incidents in your plot line are and that sort of thing. So I think it's a really great tool for fiction. It's not really, if you're writing an academic paper or something along those lines, it's not the right
That's not us.
Yeah. Okay, so Daryl says, some authors that I admire make the setting almost like a character in the story. Like Ian Rankin uses Edinburgh and Stuart McBride uses Aberdeen in this way. Should I designate the locus of events as a setting, as a character in Fictionary, or is there a different way to do that?
What a great question. So that's really interesting. Yeah. Okay. So, and I've never had that question before. So yay, good to you. So there are all of the setting elements. So you can keep track of your settings there, but if you really want your setting to be a character, then I would, on the cast of characters page, I would add that setting as a character and follow it through. Horror stories are good examples of that because it could be an actual horrific thing, but it's not a real thing. It's not a person, but it has a drive and a goal and all of those things that are important to a character in the story. So if the setting is actually something that there is a goal for that setting, or it is an antagonist to the protagonist. Yeah, you know, just use the character elements in, but relating them to the setting. That's really cool.
Great. Okay, I've got someone here who says, would it ever happen that you need to use a professional editor twice? Or would that indicate a mistake in your writing process? Or is that a valid step?
It's totally a valid step. And here, I'll tell you why. So depends where you are in your story of a process. So you can use different professional editors. So you can use a story editor for doing that portion of your edit. And I always recommend go to a different person for your copy edit, because the person who's done your story edit has read it and read it and read it and looked at every piece of it, and they can't see to copy edit, just like you can't see it in your own, and you need some help with Pro Writing Aid or a professional editor. They can't see it either. So I recommend, if you're going to do that, try and use a different person, and maybe your story editor can recommend somebody. I have also seen people who use a story edit early after a first draft, where they're really learning how to write, and they use that as part of the process to learn how to write. And then they rewrite their entire story and go back to a story editor later, a year later, sometimes, when they feel that they've made a huge jump in their story. And again, it's up to you, you know, can you afford it? That's a big question. If you think you can only afford one shot at it, get your draft as good as you possibly can before going to an editor. And that's part of the point of Fictionary Storyteller, is to help you do that so that you only have to go once.
Yeah, Christina and I are both major believers in the fact that the author of any book is the best person to do the really thorough first self-edit. As much as it would be easier to write your first draft and then send it to somebody to fix it all up, you as the writer are the best person to do that. You know what you want to say, you know your point of view, you know that your voice, you know your characters. You maybe don't even realize how much stuff lives in your head, you know, about your protagonist, about how they would react to things, about how your story should go. And so I think putting the time in to learn, you know, good writing technique, and really think about every sentence and how it's constructed, and think about every scene and how it's constructed, and make sure that the reason that you've written it and the whole point that it's there is being met. We were here with Jenny Nash the other week. You know, that's another different way that you can use a professional editor. Jenny Nash is an editor, but she also works as a story coach. And so she'll work with people right as they're still developing their stories to help them talk it through and develop their initial narrative and that sort of side of things. So that's another way that you could bring in a professional editor to get the best sort of work. But her tactic, for those of you that were with us, is that every scene needs to have a reason for being there, and you need to be able to say, I'm trying to remember what it was. It's called the inside-outside rule. But every scene needs to have a reason to be there and a reason to link to the next scene, I think. Something along those lines.
So that's really interesting. So that is in Fictionary Storyteller, and what we call it is, what's the purpose of the scene? And if it doesn't have a purpose related to the plot, it should go. Yeah. And the other thing is the exit hook. And that is, how are you enticing your reader to start that next scene? Because you want them to go, oh, I must go on. I can't put this book down. I must turn the page. And that's the exit hook. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're getting lots here. Is word count important to a story editor? I've heard that many editors won't look at anything over 120,000 words. Is it going to be harder to find an editor for a longer story? Or just more expensive?
Well, it's going to be more expensive, of course, because the editor has to spend more time. That's an interesting question, because for me, as an editor, the word count is important from the context of the structure of the story, and helping a writer know they have their structure right based on this per scene word count. The only time it might indicate to an editor that perhaps you're not ready for an edit or a professional edit is that if you're writing, say, a mystery genre, your word count should be around 80,000 words. And if you've written something 120,000 words or 200,000 words, that indicates to the editor that you haven't done your research on what's appropriate for that genre. And so they might be hesitant to edit it because a lot of it is going to be, I need to look at this now and cut 40,000 words out of here, which is really hard for an editor to do because you want to be really careful when you're recommending cutting. But at the same time, the first advice would be back, this is a mystery. You have to cut 40,000 words somehow. So as an editor, I might look at that person and just give the advice back. Do you think you could work on it yourself first and get it down to the genre count? Or perhaps you have 2 stories here and you're going to end up writing a series and do 1 book and then find some appropriate part and start your 2nd book and figure that out before maybe spending money on an editor.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the process of cutting to meet a smaller word count is so good because it just makes you look really carefully. If you know you've got to get rid of 40,000, 40,000 words, you can often find 20,000 of those without even trying, and then you might have a bit of a harder time getting on the next one. But even on our blog, we like to have blog articles that are around 1,500 words, for example. And so if I write something that's 2,000 and I know I have to cut it down, I can always get rid of that. There's just always all this fluff in there. And what I end up with is such a tighter, more concise, more clear piece of writing that people will just experience in a much better way. So it's, that process of reducing is good, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I've got one question over here from Lawrence saying, does that discount apply to the monthly payment option?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So how does the character feature in Fictionary add to character studies done in Plottr and similar programs? Are you familiar with Plottr? Plottr?
I only heard of it last week, so I can't compare the two. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Okay. Do you want to give just a quick rundown of what your character, how your character features work, and then Gordon can work it out?
Sure. Sorry, Gordon. Yeah. So how Fictionary works, when the manuscript is imported, we use artificial intelligence to pull out the character names. And so it's close, but not perfect. And what you'll see is your cast of characters all in one place in one list. And the first thing this gives you is you can look for typos, because you'll see, Catherine spelled with a K, Catherine spelled with a C, but you might not notice that in a read through. The other thing it does for you when you edit on a scene by scene basis, it links all of the characters to a scene. And as you're revising a scene, you look at that character list, get rid of the ones that get picked up by accident that aren't really a name, like Virginia is, say it's a state, but gets picked up as a name. And you look at that list and you ask yourself, does each of these characters need to be in this scene? Why are they in this scene? What do they learn in this scene? It just does so many beautiful things for you to help you keep your characters in your mind. And I find that when you visually see the character name standing out by itself, it makes it stick in your head that they were there for key events or not there for key events. And then Storyteller has insights, and so it will draw your characters per scene. So it will tell you how many characters are in every scene throughout your novel, so you can look for too many. It will tell you how many scenes each character has. So the first thing you want to do is look at it and go, "Ooh, is my protagonist in the most number of scenes or not? And if not, why is that the protagonist?" Particularly if there's a big difference to somebody else. It will show you who's got the point of view for every scene, the order they come in, how many scenes in between points of view, the percentage. And so you can really analyze your points of view and have a look at, are you using it right? Do you have too many? Is there too much time between the protagonist's point of view and the next scene with the protagonist's point of view? So there's all kinds of really interesting ways you can look at the characters within Storyteller.
Yeah, and I think the visualizations that Fictionary has are so fascinating, because it's nearly impossible to read an entire 50,000 word book and get a sense of how many of which character has the most scenes and that sort of thing. It's more than your brain can take in, because it's more than you can even read in one sitting. But then to see it all sort of graphed out scene by scene, it changes the way you look at things. I think it's really fascinating.
As an editor, I use StoryCoach to edit, which is very similar to Storyteller. And what it helps me do as an editor, I'll be reading a scene and all of a sudden there'll be some character. I'll be like, who is this person? I don't remember them. And I'll flip back to the cast of characters. I'll look up what first scene they're in. And then I can very clearly tell the writer, it's been 25 scenes. You need to put some trigger in here for the reader. It wasn't just me not remembering. It's way too far here between these. And this character's been mentioned once before, not enough. We need to do something here. And I can be really specific in my advice based on those insights. So from an editor point of view, because I use it, so I'm selfish that way, but it really helps. It helps to see things.
Okay, great. Tom has a good question here. How much back and forth with an editor is standard? So once an editor and author agree to work together and are all paid up, how much does or can the author use the editing service? Like, should there be just one pass, or is there supposed to be repeated passes until the author and the editor are both in agreement about the final product?
Right. So that is a wide open question. And, I encourage you to do your research and figure out, what do you need from an editor? Are you the type of writer who just wants the information from the editor and you want to go away and work on it and not interact? Are you the type of person who's at the other end of the spectrum and you're really looking for a story coach and you want that interaction? So what you want to do with the editor is make sure it's very clear up front. So in my case, when I edit, I tell people up front, as part of this, you can ask me email questions, of course, but I give 3 hours of one-on-one consultation after I've delivered the edit. And we can break that up in half-hour chunks, 1-hour chunks, whatever works. But it's an agreement that's made before I edit somebody's book. Now, it doesn't mean I won't go over that, but it gives me a boundary if there's if a writer is too demanding and I can't possibly handle the volume. And it also sets the writer up to understand what they expect. So there are lots of editing services where you get your edit and away you go. And part of the reason we developed Story Coach is for that market, that when an editor edits in Story Coach and they hand it off, if it is that one-time interaction, all of the writing advice is in the app for the writer to see and use as they go. So it's kind of their intelligent assistant as they move along. So you really have to decide what you want from an editor and then find an editor who's willing to deliver that level of service.
Okay, great. And the other thing that I remember you saying once, Christina, was how we were talking about getting the most out of your editor. And if you have done a really thorough self-edit yourself in Fictionary, you feel like you're better able to assess the feedback that you get from your editor.
That's right. And so if you understand, what point of view is and head hopping is and stuff, when your editor mentions it, you can go, oh yeah, I did that. Oops. Right. But if you don't know what that is and the editor says, hey, you're head hopping here, you think, okay, what do I do with that? Right. So the more you know as a writer what an editor is doing, the more value you get when you get your editing package back.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, even though pro-writing it is all about helping people learn all the rules and good writing technique and everything, we also think it's great when writers break the rules, as long as they've done it on purpose. And so if you've done a really thorough self-edit and you've made the decision that you want to change, I don't know, to write this whole section in passive voice, for example, or to break a rule purposefully and thoughtfully, then you're more able to justify that when your editor might want to change it back and make it more traditional.
Yeah, and that's a very good example. Within Storyteller, it draws a story arc for you, and then you can change it, go, no, that's not my inciting incident, it's really here. And if you see that the story arc is way out of whack, you make a decision on whether you want to put it to the traditional story arc or not, but it's up to you always, always, always as a writer, no matter what the tool says, no matter what an editor says, it's your story, you're the artist. So the more knowledgeable you are, the better decision you can make on what you want for your story.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to the question about, a mystery. If you've written a mystery that's 120,000 words, if you've got a really good reason for that, and your mystery is different from other mysteries, or your mystery is within like an epic fantasy saga, which tends to have more words or something, if you've really thought it through, then, great, do it. But if you've just written and written and written and written and written and written, and that's what you've ended up with, and you're trying to fit it into a peg, then that's quite different, I think.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's saying that my internet is slightly patchy, so if I disappear, I apologize.
I'll just keep talking.
I think you can just carry on. Okay. So someone says, how does chapter length make any difference to how well or easily a story edit can be undertaken, either manually or in Fictionary?
It doesn't really impact how difficult a story is. You'll probably find there's recommendations both from the software and from an editor if a chapter is too long. And it needs to be split into several scenes or into several chapters, however you want to format it. I will say this about chapter length. Because of the way people read today on very small devices, a long chapter, so over 2,000 words, starts to get tedious on a small device, and the reader gets tired and their eyes get tired and they get frustrated with it. And part of the research is showing that people feel satisfied when they complete something. So you finish a scene, you got a little satisfaction jolt and you keep going. If it's too long, you think, okay, come on, when is the end of this scene? And even if it's a great scene, it's a long time, and the reader needs time to process what you've said, and they need a break. And that little scene break character gives them that moment. Just take a breath and keep going. And also when people read, they're like, oh, I'm a bit tired, and they flip, this scene's too long, I'm not going to bother. Oh, it's short, I'll keep going. So there's lots of subtle things around chapter and scene length that are more important than if it's hard to edit or not.
Yeah. I struggle to, if I'm reading in bed, for example, I really struggle leaving a chapter in the middle. I like to finish it, and then I feel satisfied and I go to sleep. And so if it's a really long chapter, sometimes I just sort of like
think, oh, I can't do it
because I just really need to go to bed, which I know doesn't make sense logically, but
it's true. It happens. Yep.
That's what happens in my brain. Okay. So, this is an interesting question. There's no name here, but it says, I'm currently repurposing some journal entries from a decade earlier into my memoir, and I'm struggling with retaining what were my unformed thoughts and opinions at the time with my more enlightened knowledge now. How do you balance this for the reader? Like, do you say, at the time I thought this, or, it's an interesting question.
You know, we'll drop it in the notes. There's a book written by a woman that I read that is exactly that story. And how she did it was she basically made the earlier entries like it was a diary, so that this, instead of saying all the time, this is how I felt when I was 12 or whatever age, it jumped back into first person, written from the perspective at that age. And then everything else was written from current, I'm now however old I am, and I'm writing my memoirs. And I thought that was a very interesting way to solve that problem, because your memory does change and your opinions do change, and you can't, that's just human. Everybody does that. So I just thought that was a good way to handle that issue.
Yeah, and then you can comment on it and, talk about there's a lot of interesting commentary that you can make looking at the factors that have led to changes in opinion and thought.
Yep.
Gordon says, how does Fictionary determine what your scenes are?
So that is quite simple. When you are creating your manuscript in a DocX format to import, all you do is you put a unique scene break character in between scenes. So not at the end of a chapter or the beginning of a chapter, but say a chapter has 2 scenes, in between you'd put a star or a little tilde, and then you tell Fictionary when you're importing, and it just breaks it out that way. And it needs to be unique, because if it's a question mark, every time there's a question mark, it's going to create a new scene for you, and that's really a bummer. So it's got to be something that you don't use elsewhere in your manuscript.
Yeah, but that's all. It's all sort of done when you first log in to Fictionary and upload a manuscript. Then it asks you what your unique symbol is. So if you just put it in before you go, you set it up, and then it all just in some sort of magic happens that way. Okay, let's see. There's a lot of questions here. What about so Grace is looking at Fictionary right now. She says, how do you make the system include a prologue? It seems like it's only including the text that came after the chapter.
Okay, so when you format your document, the very first word in it will be prologue. and Fictionary will pick that up and put your prologue first, and then your chapter 1 just starts chapters, so it will format it for you: prologue, chapter 1, chapter 2, all the way down. So
Okay,
it's just
so you just need the word design. Yeah.
Just put prologue, yeah, and it picks it up.
Okay, cool. So Daryl says we've got a new feature that is probably going to be rolled out to everyone this week, but a few users have it already. That compares style features to published authors. Do you have that sort of comparison in Fictionary? I can't remember.
So what we have done is taken a whole bunch of research and made a bunch of algorithms around it to look at, over the last 20 years, what's a commercially successful book, and we measure against that. We don't measure against specific books, we measure against the trend in the industry.
Okay. Although on your, I've seen quite a few of your plot outlines for things like Twilight and some of the other books that people would be more familiar with, which again is really fascinating to compare yours with Twilight and see how it fits on the standard. We should have brought some of these graphics along.
Yeah, and so those books I personally go through and I read them, and I just do them in Fictionary and see what it looks like. So I figure out what is the inciting incident, the plot points, and I just do it that way. And that's more for, it's really just kind of fun and interesting.
It is really fun and interesting to see which books follow the line really closely. Are there different genres that follow the line more closely compared to others that are a bit more?
No, that's the interesting thing about this. It's not genre specific. There are, so first Harry Potter book breaks the rule on the story arc in that her climax is quite early, but she's leading into the next series, and it's done beautifully, and everything after the climax is everything you need. And she still ends the book super satisfying. There's no big cliffhanger where you feel ripped off that she started a new story and ends, but there's enough time in the resolution that you think, wow, I cannot wait for that next book. And clearly it worked. So it's a great example of not following the, the generic, I'll call, story arc that is generally commercially successful, because she knows what she was doing when she did it.
Yeah, well, and the other example you used was Twilight, and whether or not you like Twilight and whether or not, vampire kids is your thing, she knows how to write a chapter that ends on a hook every time. And didn't you say that her plot outline was almost exact?
Her story arc was dead on. Her entry hooks, her exit hooks, her use of backstory, just, everything you went through, you think, yep. Okay, I get why this book was so successful. And I mean, I don't read vampire books, but I gotta say, I love that book when I actually started really looking at it and figuring out what she did with it.
Yeah, well, that's the difference, isn't it? Once you've written and tried to write fiction yourself, I think you just read books so differently. I'm reading The Hunger Games right now with my son, and I'm sure it's the same thing. I'm sure it's almost exactly the same, and you can just see the hooks at all of them, and it's the best way to learn, really, is to read popular books that have been really successful and look at every scene and every chapter and see who is doing it well.
Yep.
Yeah, and someone's saying Hero's Journey is a similar sort of traditional Western-based story. But he says, does Fictionary cope with more Eastern cultural arcs where resolution and climax are a bit more subtle?
You can, but again, as the artist, you have to know your own genre. So we're taking a general look at it, and then every genre is different, of course, and every culture is different, and you as the artist have to know that and put that in appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we were saying before, if you want to break the rules, but just do it for a reason and thoughtfully. Okay, so someone says, at what point in working on my draft would I use Fictionary?
So I think it's best if you feel you have a story. So do you have a beginning, a middle, and an end? And it's written in scene format, not, scene 1 is Mike goes to the store. There's an actual scene there of him going to the store and something happens, right? So I kind of say, like, do you have 50,000 words or more? And that's ballpark. I mean, we have people writing young adults through the whole book is 30,000 words, and that's fine. It's the whole story. For that genre, it's appropriate. So I think Fictionary is at its most useful when your story is complete such a bad word, but there is a story.
You've got a
that you
solid
could-
first draft.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And they also say, what is the cost?
So there is a discount right now of 40% off, but normally it's $20 a month or $200 for an annual subscription. So the 40% off is what, $120 for an annual and $14 for the monthly.
Oh, live math with Christina Stanley.
Tricky.
Okay. Okay, we're sort of getting through a lot of these. Please feel free to add any more questions if you've got there. Someone has asked, so what are the pros and cons of an app that is cloud or internet based as opposed to standalone on a computer or tablet, and why have you chosen the cloud model, and how do you maintain security with each author's proprietary material?
Oh, that's a good question. So there's a lot of questions in there. So let me start with, we decided to go cloud-based because it's a way, you know, when we started the company, so my husband, my brother, and I, the three of us started it together with our own money, right? So it's our savings going into this. And we really wanted to develop something special for editing, and we didn't want to have to worry about all the stuff that goes around it. And so by going cloud-based, we can focus on, here's our app, and we don't have to worry that, well, now I have to build it for this device and this computer, and now, you know, Apple's upgraded their phone, and so now I got to do that. And so you end up spending a lot of money in development time, which we just didn't have to get your product out there, as opposed to making a great product and people can use it. The other reason is we didn't want to be responsible for security. So we use Google, we're on their cloud, it's fully secure. We use a third party for our billing, so we don't have any credit card information on our site. It's with the billing system. And so we chose credible partners so that we could deal with that issue and not spend our creative energy worrying about, well, how are we going to store this, and how are we going to build this, and how many backup servers do I need, and all of these complicated things. So that's all kind of about our side. From a writer's side, the feedback that we get from our writers is they like it in the cloud because they can work anywhere. And we have lots of people who are doing shift work, and they have to be somewhere, but there's not much for them to do, but they have to physically be there. And so they do all their writing at work, and they like it because now it's just whatever computer they're on. They don't have to be at home on a desktop or wherever doing it. And so the feedback we're getting from writers, they like it for that reason. And I hope that answered that question.
Yeah.
There was a lot in there.
The question we get a lot from Providing Aid is, if they upload it to your system and do their work in there, do you have any right to any of their writing?
Never. We don't even see it. No, I have to ask a writer permission if I want to see it. We encrypt it. So it's up and it's stored, and it's got nothing to do with us. It's all yours.
Great. That's an important question for people that are creating original creative work. And yeah, Providing Aid is the same thing. If you don't ask us to look at it, if you don't ask us to save it, and you just upload it, run the analysis, and then delete it, it goes right off of our servers. If you want it to be available on the cloud, you can use it on a web editor, and then in the same sort of way, you can access it from whatever device you're on. But
Yep.
And you do have to click save in order to start saving it, which occasionally bites people because they haven't clicked save and they lose some of their changes. But as soon as you click save, autosave kicks in, and then all of your different versions will be there. But we just thought it was so important to make sure that we didn't save anything that no one had asked us to save.
Right.
Yeah, so it's worthwhile. Somebody's asked about a few different other writing apps that are out there. How does Fictionary compare with Scrivener, for example?
So Scrivener is a great writing tool, and it's there to write your first draft, and we're there to analyze your first draft. It's the easiest way I can put it.
Yeah, I think so too. Scrivener is really good, especially for, creating all those scenes and moving things around and all of that sort of side of things. And then to bring those scenes, once you've got them how you like them, into Fictionary, then you've already got your scenes set up, and so then you can do the analysis there.
Right. And we love Scrivener people because they can export from Scrivener right into DocX with the chapter name is there and the scene break characters there, and then it just boom imports. And so people who come from Scrivener, the structure works very nicely right into Fictionary.
Yeah, I think so too. There's a few others here, but does Fictionary integrate with any of the other apps that are used later in the process, like Vellum, Ingram Spark, Smashwords, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and we chose not to do that. We chose to export to a very common format, so then people could go to whatever tool they want. So basically, your manuscript comes out in a docx format, and then you can import into anywhere you want to import to and use it. I mean, I love Vellum too. I use that for my own stuff. Yeah, it's a nice product.
I feel like Vellum is one of those things that people really love, but it's only Mac users, isn't it? And they're never ever going to create anything other than Mac.
Yeah. Fine.
Okay, so someone is asking, how do we integrate our program? So that's a good question. So you can use, when you're in Fictionary doing your editing in there, you can use ProWriting8's Chrome extension, and then you get your real-time suggestions happen right in the sort of text boxes there. And then if you click the little ProWriting8 icon, the full tool opens up as a pop-up over top of Fictionary, so then you can edit it there. So it works, they work really nicely together.
And I just want to say, because I use a Mac, you can also use the Safari extension for ProWriting8 in there too. Just for Mac users out there, you can do that.
Yeah, Safari as well. Firefox, Edge, I think.
Except we don't support Firefox or Edge. We only do Chrome and Safari. Those are the only two for Fictionary.
Okay. Okay,
fine.
Fine, that's fine. Okay, so if you were going to give people just some top of line advice about they've got a final draft, they want to make it publishable, what's your top advice after all your years of editing?
Top advice would be get your scene structure. So I'll just say that again because you're coughing. Get your scene structure correct. So your story needs to flow from scene to scene. And the easiest way to do that is to, if you think you're set and you've got your manuscript broken up to scenes, then name every scene. And if you can't name it, there's not a purpose to it. And if you can't name it, it probably doesn't fit there. Yeah. If you're not sure about where you've broken up your scenes, read through your manuscript and mark every single place where you change point of view character, where the setting changes, or where the timing changes. And that will give you a way to look for places where it's possible to start a new scene as you go through, and that's going to help you break it into a scene by scene structure, which then you can edit in a manageable way.
Okay. And it's that, you know, we talk a lot about making things bite-sized. You know, these are the things that you want to focus on. And when if you've broken things down, everything seems more doable. If you just have 50,000 words that you need to fix, that seems like a lot. But if you're just looking at one scene, or you're just looking at readability for this one session, and you just break it into bite-sized chunks, then you just end up with a feeling of getting through it, getting things done, of accomplishment, of making progress. That I think helps keep people motivated and keeps them.
Sure. Yeah. So I see a question here on the side. I just want to look. It says, why would I not go for the story coach version rather than the author version? And I'd love to answer that because I get that question a lot, actually, which tells me I need to update my website a bit. But story coach is meant for professional editors. So it has track changes in it. It has different coaching and information in there for the editor. So it's meant to enable an editor to be really thorough and to be comprehensive and to stay away from pet peeves of, you know, we all do it as editors. You have stuff you really don't like and you tend to mark that a lot, but you have to remember to look at the entire manuscript. And so it enables the editor to go through for character plot and setting and fill out all the elements and look at the story arc and look at the word count per scene and use that. When they do an edit in Story Coach, it goes off to a Story Coach client account that the writer receives. And so what you get is you see the full Fictionary filled out for you, and you can really see clearly in your story. And now you know the editor's been thorough and you know they've been objective. So it's more expensive than Storyteller, where Storyteller has the same structure. The information is targeted at the writer. So there's really not a lot of value for you to use Story Coach on your own book. because it's targeted to help you. Storyteller is targeted to help you fix your own story, where Story Coach is targeted an editor to help somebody else fix their story. And so, I mean, even though it's, you know, I just think it's better for you personally to use Storyteller. It's a less expensive product, but it's giving you everything you need as a writer. And to use Story Coach, it's different enough, but I don't, there's the value's not there for a writer, I don't think, to use it.
Does Fictionary have the capacity to accept scene names from Scrivener, or is there a place to put them if you have to rename them in Fictionary? Sorry,
there is a place to put them, and I love that feature because it shows up on the side then, so that you can't import them from Scrivener. But when you put them in, basically what you're doing is you're doing an after draft outline. And so what I would recommend, even if you've done it in Scrivener, don't look at that. So when you do it in Fictionary, the value is to read your scene and name it in 3 words or less. And that's going to tell you so much about the scene. It's going to tell you what the purpose is. It's going to tell you whether it should be in your story or not. And it's also going to give you an outline. So as you're revising, you can look quickly, where was that scene? And really, once you name it in 3 words or less, that is enough that you remember what that scene is about. It's very easy then to look up and down your outline and use it that way.
Yeah, I love that as a process. I'm just going to drop the link to your walkthrough session again in the chat, just because we're going to go really deep in there, and you'll actually see, Christina will do a screen share and you'll actually see it all in action. So come along to that December 10th. Even if you decide to take advantage of her discount here, it'll be a good way to help you sort of get up and running and find all of the best features. And yeah, the other thing that I wanted to mention is that editing can be really fun. There's so many writers that like the writing part and the imaginative bit, but actually the editing bit can be really creative in itself. It exercises a different kind of your brain. But I was listening to a TED Talk or something the other day, and they were talking about quilters and how with quilting, there's a real sense of accomplishment if it takes you a year to do your quilt, because it shows that you've done all these tiny beautiful things, and that instead of just getting some fabric and making a blanket, you've created all these beautiful things, and you've taken the time to do it. And actually taking a longer time to do it gives you a bit more cred in the quilting community. And I just thought, what a really nice metaphor for editing. The more time you put in, the more you look at every little bit of your quilt, the better it's going to be at the end. And if you think of every little sentence, every paragraph, every scene, all being little stories and all having a reason, then it's still really creative. It's still a really exciting process. Do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, because the thing I like when I'm using Pro Writing Aid is, it tells you the sentence is not the greatest. Maybe it's too long, or it's got too many vague words in it, or whatever. And so then what I try and do is go, okay, I'm going to rewrite that in 3 different ways. And really play with it, right? Like really think about, okay, how can I do this so it sounds great? And that to me is where the fun comes in, that, something has pointed it out, it's an issue. Well, now I get to use my creative brain to fix it. And that, I agree, that's just totally the fun part.
Yeah, exactly. I love that sort of that process. And the English language is exciting in that way. You can describe the same scene in 200 different ways. And so what's exactly the right word for the nuance you're trying to get across? What's the first thing you want, even in from one sentence, what's the first thing you want your reader to picture, even at the start of the sentence compared to the end of the sentence? That's why we're always telling you to turn your sentences from passive voice to active voice, because you can just picture things written in active voice that much better. And so all of those are little creative challenges, little creative writing prompts in there. And that's why editing is cool. It's exciting. It's fun.
It is exciting, but we're editing people, so
we are editing nerds, so that's the way it is. Okay, a couple more just practical questions. Is there a maximum word count that can be imported into Fictionary? I think Linda has written a long document here. I'm not sure if it was Linda that asked that last time about long ones.
No, and there's not. And to test it, we took a book and just copy and paste it over and over and over onto itself and shoved it in Fictionary. It will take longer to analyze going in. And when the story arc is drawing, it's analyzing your book every time. So it will take longer to draw the story arc. So it slows those little pieces down a bit. But other than that, go for it.
Go for it. put your full epic in there.
Put the epic in. Yep.
How does Fictionary approach tense changes? Is it handled the same way as POV, location, and time change?
No, we leave that up to Pro Writing Aid. We don't do that part.
Tenses, we're not super great with tenses either.
Yeah, tense is a tough one.
On.
It's a sentence level one, so we don't focus at all on Fictionary on that. So sorry, I can't help with that.
Right, okay. It's like we actually have our NLP team, our natural language programming team, working on tenses, because we're suddenly getting lots of people saying, can we help them figure out how to make sure their tenses aren't switching back and forth, which nobody has asked for 5 years, and then all of a sudden in the last few weeks everybody's asking for it. So we've got our team working on it. We're trying to figure out how we can do it and how we can help people with that. So hopefully that's coming up.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's cool. So we're coming to the end. I'm going to drop my usual links again so that you know, so everybody can sign up for everything that's coming up. And I'm going to, hang on, let me find a link for Fictionary.
Fictionary.co and /storyteller if you want to see that.
I'm going to drop it just so you can click it, and then nobody has any excuses. Okay, and there's a few questions that we didn't get to, but I think we'll get to, they're quite deep questions about Fictionary itself, so we'll get into those on December 10th when we're there. And again, we're out of time. So thank you for being here. Hopefully people found this helpful. If you enjoyed it, please let Christina know in the chat before she goes.
Really, thanks for everybody being here. It's kind of fun being on the hot seat and answering on the spot. It was a really fun hour for me, and I hope it was for you guys too.
Oh, good. Well, everybody's saying that it's been great. Have a look in the chat before you go so you can see how much everyone's...
I know, you always feel good. Thank you.
Good, and then hopefully we'll see some of you back tomorrow night for Horror Story. I can't remember what the actual name of it is, but Horror Stories tomorrow night. Come, wear your Halloween costume if you want. I'm trying to talk Haley into, I think she's in the background, I'm trying to talk her into wearing some sort of Halloween costume for all of your entertainment. See if I can,
she should.
To that idea.
I think it's a must.
Did you hear that, Haley?
You have to.
Right. I did. I disagree. we'll see how it goes.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye.